Hello and welcome to a Friday edition of Voice in the Middle. My name is Dustin. It is 4:59 p.m. in the afternoon right now. I tell you that time because things are constantly changing. So you could watch this video and then there could be some breaking news story that completely kind of changes what maybe my position would be on some things. But right now, 4:59 on a Friday afternoon. If this is the first time coming to this channel, you're like, what is this channel about? Why is it coming up and being suggested in my Facebook newsfeed? What I attempt to do is take a more of a centrist, moderate approach to the news going around us today, try to filter out the two extremisms that we have on both sides, and find a middle ground that we can actually have a discussion and talk about what the issues are. So if you've been here before and you have not liked the Facebook page, please definitely like that. Also, potentially go to the actual YouTube channel, hit like and subscribe. This is something I'm passionate about. It's something that I believe is needed. I feel like we are bombarded every single day with nothing but extreme points of views or a lot of spin that doesn't fully confer what is actually going on around us. And this is an outlet for me to try to get, just actual news, like actual reporting out there, which we don't have anymore. So let's get started. Talk about voter fraud today. And basically, there have now been confirmed cases, confirmed examples of voter fraud within Arizona. But what does that mean exactly? And is it enough to change the election? And was it super widespread? Dr. Kelly Ward, state chairwoman of the Republican Party of Arizona, petitioned the court and was granted to be able to review 100 duplicate ballots. Now, what duplicate ballots are is those are ballots that were initially being cast, but they couldn't run through the system for whatever reason, and they basically were analyzed and looked at to basically be refilled out so they could go through the ballots as long as they were filled out properly and information could be verified. Out of the initial 100, it was shown that there was essentially a 3-vote swing, so 3 percentage point difference from President Trump and Joe Biden. So what occurred is on one of those ballots, the ballot was clearly so this isn't a someone maybe thought it was cast for this person and they made that decision. No, on the first ballot, from what we're being told and is being reported, it was clearly shown that the ballot was initially for President Trump and was completely switched to Joe Biden. So that effectively is a 2-vote swing because you're taking 1 vote away from Trump and you're giving 1 vote for Biden. In the second ballot, it was clearly marked for President Trump. There was only 1 mark on the ballot, and on the second ballot, whoever refilled the ballot out also circled in the area for write-in candidate, but didn't put anyone there. And by doing so, it invalidated that vote for President Trump because there now were 2 votes there. This was fraud. Okay, there is no other way around it. This wasn't an honest mistake. This was fraud. All right. And you may be thinking, well, 2 out of 100 ballots, that isn't that much. You're right. It's not. But it is 2 percentage points. And you have to remember Joe Biden only won Arizona by, I think, less than half of a percentage point. So at 2 percentage points, if that was widespread across the entire election, that would be a 1.5-point swing difference, and President Trump wins Arizona. So what happened after the initial ballots were found, and it was shown that if this trend were to continue, it could impact the election. Basically, another 2,500 ballots were agreed to be analyzed, and they stopped at around 1,700 ballots, I believe is what it is. And out of those ballots, they found 9 that had been modified and changed, which came out to about a 0.5% difference, which is still higher than the margin of victory. So even at 0.5%, if that trend continued across all votes, it would swing the state from basically from Joe Biden to President Trump. However, that number is being skewed a few different ways, and we need to be honest about it and understand it. There were 9 ballots found that were wrong. Now, I don't know whether these were scenarios that were as fraudulent as the first 2. I haven't heard that. This could honestly be honest mistakes on these 9. I really don't know. Well, of the 9, 7 were flipped from Trump to Biden. However, 2 of them were flipped from Biden to Trump. So we now have fraud both ways. We have fraud occurring for votes for President Trump, and we have fraud occurring for votes for Joe Biden. All right. Now, I didn't do the math to figure out even 5 out of the 1,700 what percentage that comes out to, but it was not a full 0.5% difference on that. Okay, because 2 of those votes actually basically added to President Trump's vote count. Now, here's the other issue with how this is being spun, is that we are only looking at duplicate ballots. It is a very small portion of the total number of ballots cast. I believe when the last article I looked at, they said at a 0.5% difference, if that held up across all duplicate ballots cast, even if they all were for President Trump, it would only account for about an additional 100 votes. Okay. Now, does that mean that we shouldn't recount all these? No, it doesn't. I have been saying since the beginning of this channel, I cannot say one way or another about voter fraud, okay? There is not actual evidence yet that voter fraud occurred at the level that it would need to be to totally swing the election. However, there also is a lot of circumstantial evidence that warrants investigation into vote counts, all right? So I'm going to be in the same position I've been since the beginning. I do not know if Donald Trump won the election. I also, though, do not know if Joe Biden actually won the election, because there is enough gray, there is enough statistical anomalies that it could impact who actually won. And that needs to be analyzed and it needs to be investigated. All right. Now, there's another part of this scenario that I want to discuss, and that's the media's portrayal of all of this. In fact, I can all but guarantee at the bottom of this video, there is going to be a little disclaimer that basically says, the AP has called the race for Joe Biden. Our elections are extremely secure. Voter fraud did not exist. Okay. And I have an issue with that for one reason, and that is the Russia collusion fiasco that we had during basically the first 3.5 years of President Trump's presidency. For about 3 years, we were fed from the media and from Democrats that collusion with Russia existed, that there was ample evidence for it. And during that entire time, we never were told what that evidence was just that strong evidence existed and it proved that Trump colluded with Russia. And the media ran with this narrative, not knowing what the evidence was, but took the Democrats at their word that the evidence was there. And we as the American people were fed that for 3 years, all right? Now, we have exactly the opposite. We have the media and the Democrat narrative basically saying there is no way there is no way that voter fraud occurred and that our elections are extremely secure, and this is all just basically fake news from the Republican Party, if you will. There is more circumstantial evidence right now to prove that voter fraud occurred than there ever was for Russia collusion. All right. And I want you to let that sink in for a moment. If you're a person that honestly does not believe that voter fraud occurred, okay, that you think this is all just made up, all right, I encourage you to go and look at some of the lawsuits and look at some of the statistical data that is out there. Let's take Georgia, for instance, all right? In one of the latest lawsuits in Georgia, Attorney Powell turned around and basically found, I believe it was about 70 or 90,000 votes that were somehow returned within the same day or 72 hours of the ballot being sent out. So basically what that means is the ballot was mailed to person A, and the exact same day it was mailed to them, person A returned the ballot back with their votes being cast, okay? There's not a way for that to occur. What's basically been essentially proven from what I've shown is it really can't even occur within a 72-hour window with how long it was taking for ballots to be received. You could maybe have a couple of isolated cases to where maybe within 3 days they maybe could have received their ballots within 24 to 48 hours and mailed it back to them, and they would have received it within a 1 day window. But those would be extremely, extremely small, amounts in there. And it accounts for about 90,000 votes. Okay. That is a smoking gun. That is circumstantial evidence. That is evidence that warrants investigation. How were ballots mailed and received on the exact same day? That is far more evidence that maybe fraud occurred in this election than there ever was with Russian collusion. Okay. With what I just talked about in Arizona, yes, it was only 2 votes out of 100, but there was blatant and obvious fraud that occurred that can be proven. Now, is that fraud enough to overthrow the election, to change the election results? I don't know, because we don't know how widespread it is, because no one is being allowed to actually investigate any of this, and that is the problem. For 3.5 years, we heard the Democrats screaming, investigate, investigate, investigate. And now they're turning around and saying, don't investigate, don't investigate, don't investigate, when there is more evidence to prove fraud may have occurred, right? And that's all I want. And I don't care what side of the political spectrum you're on. If you voted for Joe Biden, you should want these investigations to play out so that you know one way or another. Now, here's a critique, and it's a critique I've actually heard some Democrats say that is valid. During the entire time the Russian collusion case was going on, okay, I believe based on the level of security clearance and everything, there were some members of both Republican and Democrat parties that knew what that evidence was actually based on, that probably had a better understanding. But the vast majority of congressmen, of senators, of registered Republicans, they had no idea whether the evidence was legitimate or not. But for 3.5 years, what did we as a Republican Party do as a whole? Stop investigating, stop investigating, stop investigating. There is nothing here. We essentially have completely flipped sides, right? It is now the Republicans demanding investigations, the Democrats trying to shut it down, when previously it was Democrats demanding investigations and the Republicans shutting it down, okay? So I do understand, yes, for 3.5 years, we tried to stop an investigation to see whether Russian collusion occurred. I personally never had an issue with an investigation. I was actually for the investigation, because if allegations are there, investigate the allegations. If President Trump had colluded with Russia, I would have been one of the first people to turn around and say, we need to impeach him and get him out of office now, okay? It didn't happen, though. And the only reason we know it didn't happen is because the investigation was able to take place. The Democrats forced the investigation to take place. And at the end of the narrative, they realized they were wrong. There was no Russian collusion. Well, I don't even know if they still completely realized they were wrong, but that's another discussion to have. So with all that said, this is what I want to leave you with. Let these investigations play out, right? And don't listen to the extreme sides that say that fraud is 100% proven, because it hasn't been. There is lots of statistical data information to show that anomalies occurred, but they're anomalies. For all we know, an investigation could end up happening, and maybe those anomalies, the anomalies get explained somehow, right? Or maybe they are investigated and proves fraud did occur, and it did occur at a massive level. I do want to make one other quick point, and that is about the Justice Department coming out and saying there is no evidence for fraud that they investigated, and what they came out and said the other day. I kind of actually have issues with the Justice Department saying that, because the reality is a lot of these specific allegations have not been investigated yet. I believe whatever they were investigating showed that there was no evidence of widespread fraud. But I do personally have an issue with them coming out and just saying, it definitely didn't happen, because these specific allegations that are being brought up have not been investigated yet. And I hope they are. And the explanation may come out and be completely innocent. And when this is all said and done, we may end up, realizing Joe Biden did win the election. That fraud did occur in some scenarios and circumstances, just like it did here in Arizona, but it occurred at such a small level that it didn't impact the election. But then I would also say, then we can learn from it. Fraud shouldn't happen regardless of whether it impacts the election or not. We shouldn't be okay with fraud existing. And we should figure out a way to try to, safeguard even one ballot being tampered with. How was it that 2 ballots were completely changed from one candidate to another? Blatantly changed. And again, I don't know about the other 9 and what the circumstances were there. But at least with those 2, how did that occur? What safeguards can we put in place to try to prevent that in the future? Because if nothing else, that should be what we're learning from this scenario, is we should be learning that there's a big portion of America that doesn't trust what's being told to them anymore. They don't trust the government, and they don't trust the election process. Well, that's a sad place for us to be as a country. And the only way we can stop that from happening isn't by changing the election result. Because if fraud turns out not to be there, fraud isn't there. It's about putting measures in place to learn where we do end up finding fraud and putting measures in place to prevent that fraud from occurring in the future. Anyway, thank you for sticking with me for this video. I hope you have a great weekend and enjoy it. Please, like I said, like and subscribe to the video, share it on Facebook, share it on YouTube, share it on your DMs, wherever you are that you can share that. And I will be talking to you guys again this weekend. Stay safe, be smart, and I will be talking to you guys again soon. Take care.